Hi friends, Flavio here. Today we're going to talk about piercing the veil. There are two veils that keep us away from reality. It's almost as if we're standing in a room, there is more space over there and more space over here, but there's a veil in each direction, like a curtain, like a thick veil, and we cannot see beyond the veil. I'm going to talk to you about how you can pierce the veil, how you can open the veil so that you can go on the other side in both directions because they're both related. So let's talk about this. There's a book called the Kybalion, which describes the existence of three different realms or level of awareness. One is the physical, that's obvious. Then you have the mental and then the spiritual. The Kybalion explains that the physical world is a reflection of the spiritual world. Now pay attention, a reflection, which means that there has to be the equivalent of some sort of reflecting surface, metaphorically speaking, and that is the mind, both the mental realm and the individual mind. In other words, as it is above, so it is below, meaning the universe is built this way, but also the human being, the individual. So in the universe, there are three different worlds: the physical world, the mental world, and the spiritual world. The human being has a physical aspect, a mental aspect, and a spiritual aspect. So this is really important. Think of the individual for a moment. In us, individuals, our minds are the mirror, if you will, that reflects the spiritual world onto our physical reality, thus creating it. What creates our physical reality is our spiritual reality as reflected by the mind. Now, if you have ever seen a mirror, like in a fair, like in a carnival fair or something, a mirror that is not flat, a mirror that distorts the image, you can understand how as we begin to accumulate thought forms in our minds, that reflecting surface, metaphorically speaking again, is going to be disturbed and is going to create an altered physical reality, even when our spiritual reality is perfect. The problem is always in the mind. The people say, oh, no, my problem's in my body. I have a chemical problem in my brain, whatever. Those problems in the physical body are also created in the mind. Later on, they manifest in the body, but they started off in the mind. The problem is never spiritual, and it's really never physical. Really, it's always mental. Now, a person might say to you, but I want to be healthy, how come I have this illness? Well, what happens is that the part of the mind that reflects the spiritual reality onto the physical is the unconscious. And the unconscious, the part of us that we're not aware of mentally, the unconscious itself has two sides. One is basically an archive, and the other is basically the doorway or the platform from which we jump into the spiritual world. This is important. Have you ever, like in a modern car, have you ever noticed there's like a GPS where you can load in an address and the GPS takes you there? But then there's also a computer that has a memory bank that stores everything that has happened to the car, like a black box in the airplanes. Most modern cars have the equivalent of a black box, and it stores everything that the car is doing. So when you take your car to the technician, they can just plug the car into the computer and everything that has been happening is recorded in their memory. So our unconscious mind is like the example of the car. There's a memory that contains everything that has happened, and there's also a GPS with our destiny, with our spiritual ideals, with who we really are. You see, both of those things are there. So let's take a look at this for a second, because in the memory bank, we have essentially ideas that we need to correct and improve upon. Essentially, if we go deep into the personal unconscious, what you're going to find is pain, deep existential pain. It is that pain that makes it possible for the person to be a physical entity. It's like a diver. I remember when I used to dive, and recently I went to Devil's Den and I was diving, and you carry like a weight belt. And it is the weight belt with lead on it that allows you to sink into the water. It is impossible to be living on this earth without some form of deep existential pain, but it remains hidden in the unconscious portion of the mind. Now, it's possible to heal that pain, or at least a portion of that pain that we're allotted in this lifetime, it is possible to heal, and this is what this work is all about. Life Master Academy and all the work that we do is about that. Now, pay attention to how this works, because this is really important. So if you think of the unconscious, so there's a veil here, that's why it's called unconscious. In other words, I'm aware of my mental activity up until this boundary here, beyond which it's the unconscious. On this side of the veil, I have this deep existential pain along with everything that has ever happened to me. On this side, again, this thing about science is totally metaphorical. On this side, I have another veil that prevents me from entering in touch, in contact with my spiritual reality. I don't mean spiritual like, oh God, I mean like other worlds that are not physical, because they exist. The astral plane, you know, all these other realities where there's life and existence and people and teachers and masters and everything else, that reality also exists, but we're prevented from seeing it typically through these veils. So today, we're talking about piercing the veil. Now, most people want to pierce the veil that connects us to the spiritual world so they can understand what's going on. They can seek light and truth and healing. But it turns out that we don't quite pierce this veil unless we're also willing to pierce this other veil. They're connected in some way. In other words, I have to be willing to pierce the veil of my own unconscious that gives me access to my own pain and solve some of these problems that generate the pain. I have to be willing to make corrections and changes and adjustments. I have to be willing to evolve as a human being, to grow, to become a better person. And in order to do that, I have to access the source of the problem, the pain, the anguish, the turmoil. I have to be able to access that and fix that. And in the same proportion that I'm willing to do that, I'm also piercing this other veil over here and getting in touch ever more with my true identity, with the light, with the truth. And this is what creates a powerful human being on this earth, the ability to do both. There's really no way to do one without the other. I have seen some people who use chemical substances of all types and induced states of altered consciousness and in some cases rituals and everything else, you know, to try to pierce the veil through the spiritual world. And they sometimes succeed in getting some revelations which they find very empowering, but they haven't really solved the other problem, so it comes back and bites them. In other words, we're giving a little bit of light over here, but this other, if you want to say it this way, this other darkness that we have on the other side kind of consumes the light and creates a reaction there. And people, a word that we use a lot is abreact. They go into little mini crisis when they do that in an unbalanced way. So deep within us, we carry some sort of deep existential pain. That deep existential pain results in human problems. You say, well, I don't see any deep existential pain. I'm a happy person. Okay, do you have any human problems? Or do you consider yourself to be perfect? It's kind of a rhetorical question because we do find that we have problems here and there. Starting with that problem, if we begin to go deeper into the mind, seeking the cause of that problem, you're going to find this deep existential pain. But when I say deeper into the mind, I mean at the unconscious level. What happens is that it's not very easy to get there, alone at least, because the mind, it tends to protect us from pain and suffering. So seeing the cause of our own pain creates a momentary pain, but it's a very liberating experience because behind every pain, there's a need to forgive ourselves. Behind every pain, there's the need to make a correction. In other words, this kind of pain really comes from the mistakes that we have made that have resulted in pain to others. And that pain to others is going to result somehow in a pain in me as well, even if I'm not aware of it. So here in physical reality, what we mean by the physical world is this notion that we are, number one, separate from one another. You and I are two different things. There's a scarcity. In other words, there's not enough to go around, so we have to compete for resources, whatever resources are, love, affection, money, food, petroleum, whatever. We have to compete for resources, scarcity, and amnesia, or forgetting. We forget everything, so we forget the causes. So if I'm suffering today because somebody insulted me, let's say, In the physical world, we don't remember the cause of that insult. We say, I was here, very happy, singing. This person came out of nowhere and insulted me. Now, there's no effect without a cause and no cause that doesn't generate an effect. So when that person insults you, apparently out of nothing, I can guarantee you that there's a previous cause to that effect. We just forget it. Now, in the unconscious portion of the mind, that cause exists and you can find it. And you recognize it immediately if you can get there. And when you get there, you're going to realize that it's a deep sensation of guilt that results from us having hurt other people as well. But at the time that we hurt them, we feel, well, we're separate. You know, it's not my fault that you're hurting. It doesn't matter that it's a result of my actions. You're hurting, that's your problem. We're separate people. You see? So because we forget that we're essentially one, we feel entitled and justified in hurting one another and walking away unscathed, or so we think. But every time the other person hurts because of our actions, just like in the car that has the computer that records the codes, every time that our actions result in pain to someone else, we also record the pain in there. We forget about it consciously, but the pain stays there. And because we know that we had something to do with the other person's pain, we feel a sensation of guilt, which is completely unconscious. If you ask the person, do you feel guilty? No, I don't. I did what I had to do, right? And that's fine. But that sensation of guilt remains in the unconscious. That guilt is going to generate, unconsciously, a need for self-punishment. That self-punishment happens in the physical world when this other person, apparently from nowhere, comes over and insults you. Because we forgot the cause, we say, wait, why would you come from nowhere and insult me if I haven't done anything to you? See, we forgot the cause. So the more a person forgets the cause, the more sunk they are in physical reality only, and they have less connection to their own spiritual and inner self. And you can always tell when this happens because the person is always projecting, you know, everything happens, they don't ever have to make any corrections. You know, if you're in that position, realize there's always something that we can do. If somebody's hurting next to you, don't ever think that you have nothing to do with it. If you're walking down the road and you see somebody hurting, I was at the airport the other day coming back from I don't know where, and I'm waiting in line to get a cup of coffee, and out of the corner of my eyes, I see a guy just dropped on the floor. Here's the question that you have to ask yourself. Why would I be there? I could have been 10 meters away this way and I wouldn't have seen the guy. Why would life put me in a position where I witnessed that event, if not for me to go out there and help? I had nothing to do with his fall. I didn't create it, that I can remember. I don't know who this man is. But if I'm there and this is happening, I must assume that it's for me to act. I immediately ran over, helped the man up, as though he's my brother. But I don't mean this like, oh, I'm so special and different. What I'm attempting to explain is that even if you apparently have nothing to do with this other person's pain, why would you be there witnessing it, if not for you to do something about it? So it's an opportunity. Being insensitive to other people's pains in itself creates the sensation of guilt deep within us, which then later on calls for pain upon ourselves. Anyway, we begin to pierce the veil of the unconscious over here, and we begin to realize that we have to make some changes in our character. We have to be a different kind of person. We have to become more aware of the fact that we're not all that separate after all. We're not that distant. We're not that different. There's no scarcity of anything. There's plenty to go around for everybody. And we really don't forget anything because you begin to pierce this veil. You realize it's all stored in there. So we drop this notion that, oh, just because I don't remember the cause, it doesn't really exist. We drop the notion altogether, which essentially is all a manifestation of fear. So as we do that, what happens? As we accomplish this reconnection with this side of the veil, we begin to remember ourselves, we begin to forgive ourselves. And to the very same extent, our lives begin to change and we begin to pierce this other veil over here where we begin to enter this other dimension of light and truth. And that's when our lives completely change, because then for the first time, we can be useful to others. So what we do over here is we help people pierce these veils, but it goes hand in hand. We got to do one as we do the other. I didn't make up the rules. It's just the way it is. So this is really, really important because it is the only way known, actually, to really improve the quality of your lives. Everything else is a cosmetic change. I'll tell you what I mean by a cosmetic change. When I started off in the field of hypnotherapy many, many years ago, I attended a seminar, and this man, the teacher, was explaining that he worked with this particular man who came over because he wanted to be successful. So he hypnotized this man to work hard and make money, and indeed, this client became very inspired by the hypnotic session and took on a different business and worked really hard for several years and became a millionaire, literally. So one day, he's coming back from his accountant's office, and the accountant later said that that day he had reported the news to the man that he was indeed a millionaire. He had crossed over the threshold of a millionaire. He had amassed $1 million in assets. He was literally a millionaire. So this man had a motorcycle that he had just bought because he was making money, whatever. He went to the accountant's office with this brand new motorcycle, first ride out of the box, basically, and received the news from the accountant, "You're a millionaire." At that moment, you see, the hypnotic suggestion from a few years earlier was satisfied. You want to be a millionaire, you're going to be a millionaire. Well, that man drove his motorcycle right into the back of a bus and died. So I raised my hand. This was many, many years ago. I was already on this path, of course. I raised my hand and I asked the teacher, is it possible that in your session with this client, we never really addressed, in other words, we put on this layer of motivation which stimulated, in other words, we kind of hack the mind a little bit, and we stimulate the mind for the individual to behave a certain way that in the physical world results in making more money. But is it possible that we didn't really solve any problem there? So the teacher took a long time thinking about this, and he says, it's possible, but we'll never know. So the never know part of it is another thing about the amnesia, the forgetting. Of course we're going to know. We can actually contact this man because there's no death. Indeed, there's a profound sense of guilt there because, you can become a millionaire, you can make money. There are many ways to do that. In other words, if a person steals, for instance, as just an example, they can have the money. They stole it. But here's the question. Is that going to make you better or worse? Because remember, when we steal something from somebody, I know that nobody in this audience steals. I'm giving you an example how achieving results in the world doesn't necessarily put us in a better position. We got to be careful with this. This whole notion of setting goals and achieving results sounds exciting, but it isn't necessarily something that puts us in a better position. It may or it may not. It depends. You see, why you want to achieve something and how you achieve something is more important, in fact, than what you achieve from a spiritual perspective, from a mystical perspective. Now, not everybody's on this mystical path, but I'm here to tell you we're all on the mystical path, whether you know it or not. There's only one way home. What do you think is going to happen a few years from now? We put our heads down on a pillow for the last time, and where do you think we go? We're all on a spiritual path. In other words, everything that happens here is a metaphor for evolution, learning, growth, development. It's all a metaphor. There's really nothing to achieve, in a sense, because we don't take anything with us. The only thing that really matters is who we become as a result of what we think we're achieving. That's important. Who we serve, who we become, who we forgive. That's important. But what we have in terms of achievement, it isn't all that important. Now, that's not to say that money is not good or prosperity is not good. We work with a lot of people who come here to become more prosperous, and I work with myself as well, because it is important in terms of, helping people, donating, helping your family. Of course, all of that is important. But how we do it and what our true motivations are is actually more important, because that has to do with the emerging character that we're developing, whereas the actual achievement is absolutely unimportant in of itself. So if you're a Christian, for instance, and you read the Bible, the New Testament, Jesus has this phrase. He says that if a man conquers the world but loses his soul, he's got nothing. Something like this. I haven't read the passage in a long time. But the point of the passage is exactly what I'm saying. You see, it isn't so important to conquer the world as it is to get in touch with your soul. Now, if in getting in touch with your soul you can develop some prosperity, that's excellent. And lack of prosperity or poverty is actually rooted in lack of spirituality as well. Because I just told you, part of the concept of the mentality of physicality is this notion of scarcity. There is no scarcity. In fact, the more a person grows spiritually, the more abundant they feel. The less scarcity, the less poverty there is. In the next video, I'm going to tell you how I got started on this path, and you're going to see what it has to do with poverty and all. But for now, I just want to tell you that it is possible to pierce those two veils, and in order to pierce one, we're going to have to pierce the other. We're going to have to fix a few things over here in order to get more light over here. If you're willing to do that, if you're willing to do this, you get this as a reward, and your life will be awesome. All right? Thank you so much. And remember something, there is magic in life, and we are just getting started. All right? Blessings.